I'd like to introduce the panel. Everybody knows Kirsten Auerbach. She's going to run for president on an independent party ticket, so please make sure you're all registered to vote by 2020. Mike Caviani is from Orange County, and I have to tell you, the day he got that job, the entire Orange County became Democratic. It was like a miracle to end all miracles, and he is single-handedly responsible for that.
Thank you. And
Lars
James
Robb,
came too.
yes, there you go. And he also developed cure for cancer. Lars Robb is a cat person, an epic cat person. He and his wife have probably saved thousands of cats in the time that he has been at Maddie's Fund. And how cool is that to have a man and cats together? Come on. Total babe magnet. All right. And Ellen Jefferson, I have to tell you, I met her husband last night. He is like the nicest person on the planet. So, I'm sorry, you asked for fun facts. You didn't say, you know, what they actually had to be, and it is me. Okay. So we have some stock questions to ask these guys to talk about crisis, because I think, you know, we all deal with crisis in our organizations and in our lives. And Lars and I were talking just a few days ago about what constitutes a crisis. And actually, you know, we often think about the really big things that happen, but sometimes it's just those small things. And what do they all have in common? And that is whatever systems you had in place break down. And when they break down, shit happens. And the amount of shit that happens is going to be the degree to which your crisis completely blocks you from doing the work that you're supposed to do. So, I'm going to ask the panelists, what's the hardest crisis that you've had to deal with? Lars, why don't you tell us?
So I'm going to talk about things that are completely outside of our industry here. So I've spent the last 50 years in technology, and sort of the whole saving animals was a side thing up until 5 years ago when I joined Maddie's Fund. And in technology, things will go wrong, basically. The things will break, and you'll be faced with a situation where you just need to figure out what to do. And I think the most important thing is that you think about what may go wrong. And in my industry, we call it failure mode analysis, which basically is think carefully about what are the things that may go wrong, and what are you going to do when that happens, so that when your hair is on fire and everything seems to be coming apart, that you have actually thought about what are the first things you need to do. Those of you who are here last year, we talked about a lot about what happens in the major disasters, and what are the things we can do there. And part of that is start putting things in place that you need, or that you need to do when things like that happen. Sort of going back to the biggest crisis, I was with Skype before I joined Maddie's, and was responsible for running all of Skype's systems. And 21st of December 2010, for those of you who Skype, the whole thing went down worldwide. Skype just stopped working for everybody, and this could have put us out of business. And we were not really very well prepared, and we spent pretty much 48 hours putting the business back together again. And I think the biggest thing that came out of that was really that, and this is really what Kristen talked about in the last hour, is that we need to be transparent about what's going on. And we learned some very valuable lessons about staying close with our constituents, and really trusting them with information about what it was that we were doing, what went wrong, and what we were doing to fix it, and that we were there for them. So I would say we could talk more about that, but that was sort of very much trial by fire.
I mean, yeah, I don't know about most challenging, because that might, you know, put me in the corner in a field position. I really think about like all of the challenging situations, but freshest would be just recently at OC Animal Care. I've been on the job 5 years as the director, or 5 months, it feels like 5 years, 5 months as the director there. And up until this, I guess, supposed crisis, ringworm cats did not have a live outcome. And we All of a sudden one day, I was told we have over 20 cats who've been confirmed ringworm positive in our care. And it was kind of, the shelter came to a halt, and it was, everyone kind of looked at me because everyone kind of knew, like, what does Mike want us to do now? And so we came together and met, and we had to certainly work off the premise that euthanizing all these ringworm cats was not really it's not really on the whiteboard, you know, as an option as we're brainstorming. But it's a brand new facility that we've moved into. Disease flow has not been something that's been really worked out well. The decision on if ringworm cats have a live outcome or not, this is all just fresh, and I'm new on the job. 18,000 animal intake facility, a lot of staff that I don't even know yet. And we came together and decided that we're going to do this, and I said to the staff that I don't think we can come back from this. I don't think emotionally, if we were to euthanize all these animals, if we were to kill these perfectly healthy cats who just have a little bit of fungus on them, a little athlete's foot, I don't think we can emotionally come back from this. And we may not be able to realize that now. A lot of the folks that are here have been there for the killing of so many animals, they may not realize it right now, but emotionally we can't come back from that. And then just in our community, we won't be able to come back from this decision. And so our clinic and the whole team really came together. I got on the phone with Dr. J. Well, actually, we were texting, just like, what do I do here? And what it turned into was, I think, an incredible moment of the staff coming together, either willingly or begrudgingly. But we had two unions that really were terrified at the notion that their staff were being exposed to ringworm, that the public were being exposed to ringworm. And so what ended up coming into this whole situation was a lot more than just the practical matter of how do we treat ringworm cats. There was public safety thrown into it. There were two unions that were brand new to the concept that we were ever going to be doing anything like this. And I spent probably more time than a director is paid to do, just down there dipping cats myself, down there cleaning kennels, but in leading by example and being down there myself, and in not really, I absorbed any time that someone was going to get beaten up, I made sure I was the one getting beaten up, and I made sure that I was the one kind of down there doing the hard work. But that whole incident for us, we got up to 68 ringworm cats because it really exposed inefficiencies in our cleaning and our transmission protocols, and it really helped us now. 2 months in, we have 0 ringworm cats. They were all saved. Not a single one was euthanized. They were all treated in shelter. They went to rescue. They went to foster. But that was, for us, a big turning point, because now we have policies in place that are memorialized, and the next time we have animals in our care get some cooties, it's no longer going to be a fight. But it was certainly a battle for about a month, and we're better off for it.
Kristen, what do you deal with?
So critical reporters, I call them shame captains. They occasionally pop up. They're frequently dog bite victims at some point in their life and decide that your whole organization's going to come under scrutiny for literally everything you do, and show up at your work and hostilely interview you and ask you to explain why X dog did something, or why the space surgery staples came out of this dog. And it's so stressful because we deal with 17,000 animals a year, and to have someone that just wants to destroy your mission and vision in the name of sort of like bringing something to the public information is the hardest thing that I ever deal with, and I'm terrible at it.
Dr. J.
I think my most challenging experience has been around my profession. I'm a veterinarian, and I think we have a lack of understanding as professionals about what's happening in shelters and the struggles that shelters go through, and the volume of animals and the lack of resources, and the ability to try to really look at, like Kristen was saying this morning, really look from the life-saving lens through everything. And I think that we're expected to make the decisions to kill, And that's not really a fair place for professionals, for veterinarians to be. I know it's for a reason, but in my personal experience, it's been difficult. And probably the biggest example of that was in San Antonio when I was trying to help down there, and walking into a 30,000 intake facility with a 30% save rate, and seeing people bringing buckets of puppies up, and knowing those puppies, everything under 4 months was euthanized on intake because they didn't have a stray hold for those young of animals. So these animals that an hour away were highly valuable, and of course they couldn't all just go to Austin. We tried everything to just get them out the door, just like throwing them at fosters, throwing them at people, take them, we'll try to rally back up after all of these get out. And every day it was like that. And there's this understanding in the industry, whether it's veterinarians or shelters, that it's just normal to have that sort of war zone going on. And so by normalizing it, we're not allowing for extreme measures to save those lives. And I ended up in a huge lawsuit with the Veterinary Board of Texas. We won, thankfully, but it was a really long battle, and it was all over this idea that even as a shelter vet, you should offer really top-notch care to every single animal. But when you're dealing with tens of thousands of animals walking in and no vet help, I don't know how you do that. And the vet board just told me that I needed to get over it and let them die, but that's not the answer it should be. And so that was really challenging. I almost lost my license over that.
Okay, so now that you all have thoroughly depressed us,
We saved every ringworm cat.
thank you, Mike. I appreciate that, and I knew that you were the outlier on this. So what is it about crisis that you want this audience to know, to be able to take back with them? Because they all deal with probably similar types of challenges in their organizations. And so what are some key tips, techniques, just, what do you do? What's Crisis 101, Crisis Management 101? What should that be looking like for progressive leaders today?
So I think one of the things that is really important is to understand the root cause of what's going on. You very often see a lot of symptoms, and you may not understand what really caused what's going on. I'll give one example. So I'm on the board at the Humane Society of Silicon Valley, and we had an outbreak of canine flu a couple of years, maybe less than a couple of years ago, and it wasn't quite clear where it came from or the scope of it. And we put a lot of effort into trying to find out, first of all, where did it come from, so we could find out what were the vectors and where might it have spread to, and then also what did we need to do about it? How easily could it spread, and who had been exposed to it at that point? And I found out that it was actually somebody who had done a rescue mission to South Korea and taken some of these dogs out of what they use there for food, right? And gotten them to the state, and they brought the flu in with that, and we were able to isolate where those dogs had been, and found out that it was not a major exposure. There was a somewhat lightweight quarantine for a while, but it really never became a real crisis. It could have been a full-blown crisis, right, if it had really been just let's stop everything and close down the shelters and so on, and it never emerged. So I think really trying to peel back and understand what is the root cause of all this is really important.
I think every crisis is a puzzle. And I think we have to really watch the language that we use. We call a lot of what we do crisis.
I was just going to say that you stole that.
I know, that's why I talked first. But they're really puzzles to be solved. And so I had this, we have this thing called the tent, which is a whole other day, but it was this giant circus tent that my awesome county put up to stop killing dogs through space. And it housed 150 dogs. And for months and months and months on end, we had this pneumovirus disease that was going around, and it was like your worst nightmare disease. We would think we'd have it isolated, and then it would pop back up a few days later, and it felt, because I was about to say most crises are temporary, but they're not always. But the thing is that they're always just puzzles to be solved, and if you approach them more as puzzles than crises, I think that it's more empowering way to think about them. Yeah,
and certainly do agree that don't let other people tell you it's a crisis too. You know, like you decide if it's a crisis or not. You know, even in this ringworm example I brought up, everyone wanted to keep using these words outbreak and emergency, and I'm like, it's not an outbreak, it's not an emergency. Some cat's got athlete's foot. We're gonna deal with it. But let's not like tell your story. You know, be the one to be controlling the narrative. And I think that brings just another point on this transparency talk on. I think it's probably feels safer to just kind of button down the hatches during a crisis and, you know, not let people know about it. But some people talk, right? The animal world, everyone knows it's going to get out at some point. And so it's way worse if you try to hide it, you know? And so bring people in to help, as we keep talking about, but it's also just from a self-preservation standpoint, it's going to be better for you if you're actually just being open about it. And then I would say don't over pivot, you know, like certainly learn from the crisis, learn what could have been done better. That's just the key to coming out of it. But try not to, again, allow others or yourself to lose sight on the bigger picture, whether it be, I'll speak on this I think on a different panel today, but whether it be getting beaten up about like a free adoption that went horribly wrong. Don't overcorrect and all of a sudden start putting in adoption restrictions just to appease people to get through the crisis if you know that at the heart of what you're talking about, it's the right program, it's the right philosophy. Something went wrong, okay, adjust that, learn from that, but don't oversteer and go a direction that you really shouldn't be going or going against the course of history, you know?
Mm-hmm. I would just add that having a plan, sitting down, I give myself one night to toss and turn, and by morning I need to have a plan, like 3 steps that I'm going to take to correct the problem or deal with the crisis.
Yeah.
So for those 3 people that weren't in Kristen's presentation just before this, so what do you mean by pressure to kill? What is that?
It might be what's happened before you. It might be just that first decision. It's certainly the easiest, right? I mean, it's certainly the easiest thing in any of the situations we've talked about. And so easy doesn't mean right. So, you know, I think kind of bracing against the fact that it would be easiest or it would be the thing we've always done. Sometimes.
So how do you take that out of your toolbox?
Sorry, I was just trying to adjust my mic.
It looked like you wanted to talk, so we're all just letting you talk back.
I don't know. I think, you know, it's hard to, it sometimes feels like you're speaking a foreign language. So it's hard when people are telling you that you need to do something because it's better in the long run or it looks better on paper but really what they're saying is you need to kill more animals. It's hard to have that conversation because you don't know if you're at the same philosophical point. You're probably not at the same philosophical point. I had an incident a long time ago with kittens, and we were starting a kitten program, and we had maybe 60% of the kittens survive the first year, and 40% died. So, like Kristen mentioned this morning, we've even had grantors say that we're not going to give you money because you've had too many died in care. And I was like, well, what should we have done? Don't take them. It's like, well, then they would have been dead in somebody else's care. But euthanasia is okay, but dying because we're trying to save them isn't okay. It's a really weird place to be. So I don't know if I answered that question, actually.
Well,
No.
You can also just, I mean, look at one thing I've said a few times in Orange County is I'm not some crazy person who's come in here and invented all these ideas, right? Like this is where the nation's going, this is where the industry's going, and so we're taking killing off the table because we didn't just come up with this. Look at this conference, look at, you know, where we're going, and so you can point to best practices and you can point to the fact that other communities and other shelters have already done this. There's very few things that we're facing right now that isn't already happening and proven. So I think that also very much helps removing killing from the option list.
You know, I think as a municipal, I see a lot of my shelter director colleagues in the room, and I feel like half of my job is defending why I'm not killing more animals. And I have extremely supportive leadership, but we have people saying, they're sort of saying that it's sort of back to that business model argument you get above whatever, 75, 80%, it's not a good business model because it's too expensive to save them. And so I'm finding that every single day. What I did right, which someone advised me to do, is before I took my job, I wrote down 6 pages of what I was going to do. And 5 of those 6 pages involved saving lives. And that was really good advice. And so for all of you, you'll all move around in your careers because it's animal welfare and we all do. If you can manage expectations up front around the fact that you are here to save more lives, you are going to create a no-kill organization, that can really help you in the long run. I think it gets tough when you're trying to change the old ways of doing things. And a lot of you are in that position now.
So actions certainly speak louder than words, and I think this conference is a testimony to that. But just as Kristen, you were saying, the rhetoric that's out there, the narrative that's out there is that this is the exception and the rule is something else. Mm-hmm. And yet, from your presentation, we see the history of why all of those things happen. And the question today is, why do we persist in continuing to build on a system that is so inherently broken? I mean, where else do we have a system whose foundation is still rooted in the 1800s and really hasn't changed that much? I mean, that's unbelievable. Like, I should have a horse and buggy thing out there or something, you know, not my whole life on my wrist. So we're just regular people. How do we start making those kinds of changes in our communities so that it isn't so ridden by the crisis mentality that requires the solution of we need to kill? Mm-hmm. How can that ever be acceptable? I think there was a question in there somewhere, but who knows?
I mean, I think I have a very micro answer to that, in that just as I'm, new in this director role in OC, I'm just looking at every vacant position I ever have. I'm not just filling immediately to, all right, I got to hire this new animal control officer or this new wherever. How are we building our organization in a different way? How are we creating staff positions? How are we, loosening up our budget to create positions that are actually built in with performance measures that are vastly different than what we've been measuring, right? So actually performance measures around intake prevention, not how many are we bringing in, performance measures around length of stay and getting them out quicker, and just foster, being the actual measurable. And so not just blindly like, well, all right, we need another kennel attendant, but like, well, no, hold on, of course we need a certain amount to do our job in shelter, but not just perpetuating those same positions and position titles and duties and measurables, and just actually every opportunity that I have, all right, cool, how can I use this to change how we're operating as an organization?
Mm-hmm. So just to build on what Mike was talking about earlier also, that, and Barry, I was talking about this a couple of days ago, it's like Rahm Emanuel used to say, never let a good crisis go to waste, right? That when it happens, you need afterwards to very, very dispassionately sit down and look at what went wrong, what were the things you should have done differently, and the dispassionate part is very important, right? You can't start casting blame or blame forces outside your own organization. You need to look at what would I have done differently had I known this would happen, and what are the lessons that we can derive from this going forward, so that next time something similar happens, we're better prepared for it.
Yeah, I would just add that the crisis isn't necessarily a bad thing. It seems to really propel our movement forward, at least right now. It doesn't seem like governments and entities are really spurred on by just wanting to do the right thing for the animals. I know that that's an overgeneralization, but it seems like more money's added to budgets every time there's a crisis, as opposed to somebody making a good case for just doing a better job. So I think that you're right. Take advantage of the crises and turn it into a favorable thing that can happen in the shelter.
So how do you just not quit?
Did we all just think, alcohol, and then wait, no, don't say that. Don't say that. Oh, shit.
Okay, there's a program that you could go into for that.
I
If
think
anyone knows me, like I barely drink.
Yeah.
But.
I think this is one of those movements that's working. And it's like if I were doing prison abolition, or I'm living on the county that has the longest stretch of the border and watching the fight that's happening there of just trying to provide basic human rights, or the children that have been separated by their families. If I were in one of those social movements, I think I would just quit. I don't know how those people are strong enough to do that work. We are working in a movement that's working. And so I think every day there's a lot of joy and excitement, and I'm lucky to be in a position that every day I can put my job on the line and know I'm going to land someplace soft because of the people in this room and because Ellen promised me. I can just be brave. And that feels amazing. And I feel lucky to be in this movement at this moment.
Early in my career, those moments that kept me going were the animals. The dog I'm working with, who's now, wow, I can't believe what we've achieved with behavior modification or through playgroup. And of course, I kind of still need those moments every so often. But it's been the last half of my career that it's actually those moments with staff and with volunteer, with people, where that's what prevents me from quitting, is just seeing those lights turn on for people that I'm working with, and knowing that even if I'm having a day where I'm just like, God, I am dragging today, I know that that there are people who are able to actually achieve their life goal and their life mission of saving animals, and that I could have any part in that I could have any part in helping ignite that, and just seeing that happen in people, is what keeps me going, because that is an incredible thing, because that spreads the work all over the country, that spreads the impact more than just that one animal life. And again, I still need those moments, but it's the people that you come to work with, whether it's your counterparts or whether it's, the kennel attendant who's been on the job for 3 months who writes to you saying, oh my God, this is what I actually wanted to work in a shelter like this is what I wanted to work in, and I'm here, tell me what you need, and it's just people like that I think will always keep me going.
Thanks.
So fortunately, I've never been put in a position where I had to make those decisions. But I got to say, you just got to look at the pictures that Kristen showed this morning, right? But we're talking about living beings here, right? And by saving the animals, we help save ourselves, right? It's not just saving our own souls; it's also that our lives become better by being around these animals, and the more of them that live, the better we are.
I'm really excited about all the things that we can accomplish in this movement in our lifetime. There's so much unknown in our industry that we don't have any clue about, and it's so crazy because almost everything else around us has already been thought about and figured out and solved, and we as individuals can actually solve things and be the inventors and be the people making history. So I think it's just really exciting. Mm-hmm. The failures are not enough to overcome all the things that we can succeed at. And I have a little quote on my computer that I got out of a fortune cookie, and it says, failure is only failure when you stop trying. And it's totally true. I'm planning to go out when this is all over and the whole world's no-kill.
All right, cool. All right, how about all of you sitting in the audience? What questions do you have from our panel of crisis experts?
Can I say one last thing on the how do you not quit thing? Just because I think one thing that I struggled with early was this pressure that I have to work my tail off constantly every day, don't take days off. It was heroic to not take a day off and to brag about that. And we need you all to be in this for the long haul. So that's, whether it's at this point contrite or not, take care of yourselves. Don't feel like you have to work every single day, work your butt off. I've seen a lot of good people who come in guns blazing and then they leave after a couple of years. And so I've been in it 15 years now, and I still love going to work, but it's because I also allow myself to sit on the couch and play video games or take my son, out to have fun, and I don't miss his important things in his life, So just, you have to do this for the long haul. So take care of yourselves.
Questions or stretching? Okay, come up with a question, Rory. Here, use the mic. Seriously. I call on people.
Like we're being interrogated with these lights.
know.
Yeah.
What do you do instead of killing animals?
What do you do instead of
In that moment or just in general?
In a moment of crisis.
Foster.
Just find another outcome. Try to figure it out. That's what I mean about tossing. You feel like you're in a box and you don't know the answer, but you should have an answer by morning and figure out what to do and start working towards it. Whether it's pushing them to foster or, I don't know, like in my kitten situation, working with that shelter to try to get some of them placed themselves so that we could get a little breathing room.
Yeah, like just to be really specific with this ringworm situation I've referenced, we didn't have the space to really abide by what Dr. J recommended to me, with really creating space for only new intake, so that at decon that whole room, that's only now new intake, and room by room by room, closing down rooms, dipping every single exposed cat, and now making each room a new sterilized room for new intake. We didn't have room for that, and so killing would have been the best way to do that, but we got on social media, we asked for help, we asked our volunteers, we asked our fosters, we worked with Stray Cat Alliance to really get our return to field program the best it could be. So we pulled every lever we could to give us just the space we needed to pull off this really systemized process. And I think in 2 weeks we went from 350 cats in shelter to under 100 with this adoption promotion, foster, rescue, and that allowed us to actually save every single ringworm cat.
Dr. Levy has a question.
This microphone is being kind of passed around firmly by Mary. So my question to you is, we have a shelter medicine program at the University of Florida and a lot of interest in our veterinary students in being shelter or nonprofit veterinarians, and yet there is what appears to be a growing shortage of folks to staff all the enormous number of coming positions in shelters, spay-neuter clinics, access to care clinics, and I'm hearing in some places that this is like clinics are closed, positions are not being filled, and is holding back all these projects that you're talking about. So I'm interested in yours or others' opinions on how we can better recruit more veterinarians into the field and then keep them happy and engaged when they join so they don't burn out and wash out. Do we need mentorship programs that you can help with, or other bright ideas to populate our field with more veterinarians?
I think a couple things that have popped up in my mind over the weekend is maybe a coalition of shelter vets that are kind of working in these really difficult places and trying to save all the lives. Because there's shelter vets that are in shelters that aren't killing anything and have a lot of resources, and that's a completely different battlefield than working in a place that has a lot of death. And then there's and a lot of those offer really good care for the ones they save, but then there's a whole bunch dying. And then there's also these shelters that are trying to spread their resources over the entire population. And I think that last group doesn't get any love. And if we could figure out how to make that, like a group, a support group, or maybe try to entice people over to this. Yeah, it's brutal, but it's going to have the biggest effect in the long run for getting animals out alive. So maybe some sort of team spirit around that. And then I can't help but think we've got to start thinking about physician's assistants for veterinarians, or somebody that can do part of this work legally. That's my only two thoughts. I don't know if you guys have thoughts.
What Dr. J said, I guess, yeah.
Any other comments to that question? Okay.
I have a vet position opened in like a week if you want to move to Orange
I have
County.
two. I have two. Lower cost of living in Tucson, just saying.
Beautiful weather, beautiful beaches.
Hi. We are on the path to saving more lives, and the fight, I guess, is the resistance from staff who don't see the light at the end of the tunnel, where they are in the darkness. They are the ones that are seeing the back end of the euthanasia, but they don't get to see the bright side. So my question is, how do you get them to see the light, and how do you get them to be on board and not resist to all the positive changes when they are the ones who see the darkness?
That's such a great and important question. I've changed my thinking on this so much over the last few years, because I think, one, we have to start to recognize how our personal traumas and life experience informs our feelings about the work. I have animal caretakers I have this one woman who, she's a cat caretaker, but she was there in the old days when her job was euthanasia. I think they had 4 euthanasia shifts, and they went overnight. And we interviewed her for a job recently, and she couldn't even answer the questions because all she could do was tell us stories about those days. And one of the stories she told, which has never left me, is that she used to, at the beginning of every day, pick her kind of favorite animal that she was going to have to euthanize that day. And she couldn't ever decide whether she should kill it first so that it didn't have to watch all the other animals die, or if she should let it live for the whole day so that it could hang out with her and like spend time with her before she killed it. And I've thought about that story so many times, because the kind of like human rights violations these people have lived with having to do what they've done, and the kind of trauma they've survived doing it, we have to start recognizing that first and foremost. So you have resistant staff who are just kind of assholes, and then you have resistant staff who are traumatized and don't want to deal with what they had to do. And we have to figure out better mechanisms to separate those two things out and to deal with them differently, because it's really easy just to like write all those people off. And sometimes writing them off and getting them out of the organization is the right thing, and sometimes trying to help them heal is the right thing.
So apparently I have a question. Thanks, Mary. So Mike, you said something earlier that I thought was really interesting about like not allowing somebody else to tell you that there's a crisis and when there's a crisis. But I think the reality for a lot of our shelters is that these crises are manufactured, because the platform that social media gives for even our most harsh critics to amplify their voices, and they can create a crisis when there really isn't one. Does anybody have any advice for how to sort of handle these manufactured crises that become them because of the amplification?
We've gotten advice from marketing experts on crisis communication, and I think that maybe Mike said this, that the most important thing you can do is try to get ahead of any situation that might be brewing. So trying to over-communicate something, even if you over-communicate and nothing comes out of it, you've still solved the problem, but you're always going to be more successful if you're the first one that speaks. It's kind of like a straw man document. You bring the document to the table, it's always going to be the document that gets out of the meeting in some way, shape, or form. So I think that that's really important. And then I think we're not very good at defending ourselves either. And I think we need to maybe get better at that as an industry, where we're providing facts and being more transparent about what's actually going on.
Yeah, and be ready with those stats. Like there's, Kristen was mentioning those reporters who've been bitten by dogs in their lives and then come attack you. And we dealt with that in Austin, and I think we could have been better prepared, but one thing that we had done was, I think we quickly pulled this together, but we did a survey of all of our adopters of large dogs for, I think it was a 2-year span, because one of the criticisms of this reporter was that we're just putting dangerous dogs into the community and we're just recycling dogs who've bitten people back out into the community. And so we were able to at least quickly run this survey out. We got a decent response rate, and I think the stat was that only 1% of our dogs who've been adopted in those 2 years had ever been returned due to any kind of human aggression. And so I think, one, being better prepared to like have that data so you don't have to scramble to run those surveys, which we still have to get better at, but even being able to even if though it was manufactured, be ready to refute that with actual facts.
Mm-hmm. Did I forget to mention that if you ask a question, you get special consideration during the grant giveaway? Right on.
I have a question.
This question is for Kristen. You had mentioned the shame captains. How do you deal with that frequently and not get discouraged?
I'm really bad at defending myself. I think that Ellen said it right. It's like somehow there becomes this idea that we're supposed to be responsible for every animal's health and action throughout the animal's life, no matter what, in the community. And at times when the media kind of latches on, they're asserting that pretty aggressively to us. And we need better ways of talking about the community's ownership over homeless pets. And how we all, and I think data is probably our best way to counter that. And the last time we had a reporter go after us, we just prepared a comprehensive data report to counter what they were saying with facts, and it kind of worked. But it also, I think that we all just need to expect that stuff is gonna happen. And see it as noise. It's really hard for me because I'm the good kid who wants to always make the teacher happy, and I feel like the reporters become this just horrible critical figure that I can't make happy. And we need better training and support around having people like me survive that. There's a famous clip of me hiding in my office from a reporter from 6 months ago because they kind of did a bait and switch where they said they were coming for one thing and came to attack me, and I was like, I'm gonna hide in my office. That's not a great idea. It didn't work out super well. So I don't think we as a movement really have this figured out, and I think we need to expect that as we become more high-profile, respected organizations, we're going to get more of this. The better you do, the more scrutiny you're under.
I want to add to that. I know you didn't ask me because we talk all the time, but we have this movie star that comes and visits us, Justin Thoreau, and I asked him what he does with all the hecklers. What training do superstars get to deal with all the crazy people on social media hounding them all the time? And he said that they're instructed to never look at their social media comments. They're not allowed to Google themselves. They're not allowed to read magazines. They're not allowed to do any of that. And I thought that was brilliant. That's what we should be doing. Just ignore it. It's all noise.
Mm-hmm.
Even before Justin Thoreau became your best friend, you taught me that years ago because I was getting really, really stressed at people attacking me on social media about specific dogs that we weren't able to save for behavior, and you forced me to not go on social media for that night, and it was so hard, but it allowed me to come to work the next day and just solve it, so for sure.
But I also think that engaging your community, all your constituents and the people who are really rooting for you, get them engaged and get them to speak for you when things are happening is a very important thing, right? Because I agree, you don't go there. Mm-hmm. It's evil.
I got it put over here too. Actually, I raised my hand when she did the grant thing, so special consideration. This is a completely different topic, but I think it's something that I struggle with. The idea that we have to euthanize, I think, becomes most pervasive in our organization when something happens that causes the staff to become afraid. Either something within the kennel, a dog kills another dog, or a staff member is bitten or severely bitten, or pressure from the community when something really frightening happens in the community. So do you have tools for dealing with fear, both internally and externally?
That's a good question.
Ellen's the most amazing at this, I think. The T-bone story. There was this dog, which she needs to talk, not me, but there was this dog that Mike and I both did not advocate for. We were both like, this dog is not safe, it needs to die. And we both fought pretty hard on that one. And this was when I was in Austin. And Ellen kept pushing us, and she kept saying, we know this dog lived with kids, we know it lived with small dogs. We know this dog was fine in a home, and that whatever has happened to it is based in the shelter environment. And she pushed Mike and I, both who are pretty strong advocates for behavior dogs. And T-Bone now lives his life as an off-leash dog owned by a dog trainer who goes and shows the entire country how a good dog behaves. And it really like kind of rocked my world. But Ellen didn't. She was pretty relentless with us, and she just knew what was the right thing to do and pushed. Ellen, why do you do that?
Well, that one was easier because we knew his history. It's harder in the shelter when we don't know their history and they're doing bad things. I don't know. We don't have all the answers for those dogs. But I do think there's some element of fact finding we need to be better at. We need to be sleuthing out as much as possible about what is going on in that dog's life and what has gone on in that dog's life. And we never have enough time to do it. It doesn't mean that they're any safer, and you still have to deal with that. But I don't know. I don't have a good answer. I mean, we currently euthanize really bad behavior dogs too, but I'd like us to figure out how do we manage better? How do we have fewer of those?
So actually, the first time Mike and I met, we had a conversation about post-adoption support, and I think one of the things that we always have to realize that the environment plays such a crucial role in the behavior of an animal, right? That it may just be the environment, and it may be a perfectly perfect animal in a different environment.
Sure.
That's another area I wish we had more research on too. I know you're not really asking about the dog, you're asking about the fear, but we don't know anything. We're all just guessing about what to do because we keep killing our research subjects. You know, we don't know. We don't know how they're all going to act when they leave.
Hi there. Have you ever had to deal with a natural disaster on top of your sort of daily crises? And if so, what are some solutions or ideas that allowed you to continue your mission of saving lives?
Harvey?
Yeah, go for it.
No, I don't want to talk about Harvey. I'm still working off that. No, you talk about Harvey. I'll add some color if you want to talk about Harvey.
The community wants you to help, and they'll support you in helping, and I think you should help. I don't know. That's all we did. We just jumped in and helped during Hurricane Harvey, and we didn't see a large response. We thought we kind of expected, and I'm not looking too much further outside of Houston or the immediate, Austin surrounding area for crises, because I hope this isn't happening everywhere. But I assumed that others were taking care of that, because we have so many emergency response programs around the country, and they weren't at all. And so we were getting funds for just doing like a piddly amount of work, but we were getting enough funds to actually do a lot more, and so we did it. And so I would just suggest acting, doing what you think is right in the moment, and asking people to help.
That experience did teach me, I take it more seriously. I think a lot of us, we have so much to do every day that we don't necessarily have a great plan for if a natural disaster actually happened. And so, in Orange County now we have wildfires. And so I know at some point we're going to be in a situation where we have to be able to maintain operations and respond to an emergency. So Harvey at least put it in real life. And so I take it more seriously now that we still have to carve out time to plan, even though every day is a crisis because of our just nature of our world.
Taking one of Ellen's 12 rules, the transport transfer is a really important tool when you have disasters like that. Start thinking ahead for who are the shelters that you want to work with, who are the ones who can help you, so you can empty out the shelter that's closest to the disaster happening, and that you're more ready that way.
But don't keep 30 kennels just free because what if of a disaster, right? Don't do that.
In a crisis, my question for you is, I think we've all dealt with, the online kind of mess that it can be, or your keyboard warriors, or, public sites that are invested in the community but can be kind of vitriolic. For a developing organization who's trying to open up more into a no-kill philosophy, reducing restrictions, getting more dogs in foster care, but there's still a lot of misinformation going on during a crisis, do you think it's important to try and get in touch with that people at that moment to say, hey, this is actually incorrect, this dog is not available for rescues? Or do you say, we need to go and devote our time for boots on the ground, getting those animals in foster care? I'm just wondering, where you kind of devote your resources.
What dog wouldn't be available for rescue placement?
That's a good question. It really depends on people a little bit higher than me, but usually you're looking at more severe behavior stuff or medical stuff we can't manage long term.
I'd be looking to your rescue partners for that stuff, not to nitpick on that, but I think it's like a good example of how we're still stuck in this old way of thinking and putting barriers in place. So the number one rule for us is not putting barriers in place to people helping us. And so we are going to look for a way to make things work, particularly in crisis. I think what Mike and Ellen aren't saying is that Austin is a crisis because like it floods here. It'll rain like 49 inches in an hour or something. And they deal with crisis all the time. But they just, I got to come here for 2 years and kind of watch as an observer. I was working at the shelter, but I kind of got to watch them snap into action. And I feel like they have this model set up where they open the community net really wide during crisis, and then they just sort of like normalize it again. They're always asking for help. The community help net is always open, but during crisis at APA, they just open that net wider, and you'll see these images where they have flooding at TLAC, and they ask for foster, and they've got like 200 people lined up to take every single animal out of there. They're not putting barriers in place, they're opening that net.
One thing I would say is that, and I think we kind of learned this the hard way really recently, when we started, we were kind of untouchable from the social media terrorists because we were all volunteer. Everybody knew everything that we were doing, like there was nothing hidden. And over time, we became more closed and more things happening behind closed doors and less of that community feel. So some of even our own people started attacking us. And when I think that opening that net and keeping it open as wide as possible and letting people help, giving them jobs, telling them all the things that are wrong and asking them to help fix them is part of how you get an army of people that are going to support you on social media so that you don't even need to worry about it.
Yep.
You have people fight your battles for you. But your army has to be big. They're not just going to do it out of the goodness of their heart. They need to feel like they're actually part of your army.
Yep, that's the key difference that I can feel moving into a community that's yet to be brought in. Moving from Austin, they've been brought in Austin, so when there has been ever any social media drama, the community in Austin fights the fight for us on social media. In Orange County, we haven't built that yet, and so I've seen that through a couple pieces of dramatic stuff in Orange County. The haters have a lot more of an audience because there aren't all these people in the community that have been brought into the shelter, trust the shelter, and say that's BS. I'm going to go on there and defend. They're more willing to even they're more willing to listen to the BS, and so that I've seen that really stark contrast, which is why we are now telling our own story and we're seeing a change in tide.
Mm-hmm. But and I take it a step further, it has to be their story too. So that's part of being the army, is that everybody feels like they're actually in the game with you, not you're telling them what the game is.
Right.
Hi, I think this question fits in what we're doing. Kristen, you had said something in the presentation earlier today about OREs, which is something I talk about a lot. I'm wondering if our lexicon has to change and we just get rid of OREs and they just become surrenders. And how would that affect what you're talking about?
I think I've thought a lot about this topic. It's a little bit like breed labeling, which was a fight we fought for 3 years and won. And I think we need to change all of the language around intake and outcome categories because it's all old. So it's not just OREs, it's things like owner surrender. Like when we think about the category owner surrender, the implied outcome of that is that the animal is going to be surrendered to the shelter. But what if that category was owner needs help? And then the secondary intake type was intake. We need to really revision for this time and for no-kill sheltering how we intake an outcome, because we don't have a way to account for things like return in field. What about when an officer finds a pet it picks up that pet, but it calls the owner and says, can I bring your animal home? We don't have a way to capture that in the data. And so I actually think it isn't just an ORE issue, it's an issue with the whole way that our software systems are intaking and outcoming animals, because we're all doing things like pet support centers and providing resources to keep pets in the community, but our software systems can't accommodate any of that. And an ORE is just, to me, the most extreme symptom and the most impactful symptom of working off of a shelter, working off of software systems that don't describe the work that we do today.
Yeah, I mean, you guys haven't gotten, well, you have the subcategory, right?
We don't accept animals for owner-requested euthanasia as a primary intake type anymore. They come in owner surrender. Secondary type is owner request. We just found that our vets were they were sort of unconsciously quicker to euthanize those animals, and so owner surrender is the primary intake type. But what I'm saying emphatically is I don't think that is the end game either.
From a practical standpoint, as we're transitioning away as well, that's what we're at least starting to implement. Just again, from a practical, here we are now. Yeah, we're trying to just have that service become less and less of a service, and then I do believe in the near future it won't be a service we provide necessarily. They'll all be owner surrenders, and we'll certainly track and measure that the condition of the animal potentially warranted that, if that's the case, but they all need to go through the same exact process that any animal would go through.
Yeah, I didn't even know that was actually a category until like 2 years ago, because it doesn't make any sense. It's an owner surrender.
Right.
At least as far as, I agree 100% with Kristen though. The language doesn't really work for what we're actually doing out in the world.
Right. And I don't buy the whole, well, who are we to tell an owner? Not everyone knows all the aspects of options that exist out there.
Yeah, we don't trust owners on anything else. Why do we trust them on that?
Right. Sure. Right. Well, and the point I was making is that I hear that as a reason to continue doing it, to continue doing OREs, because who are we? These people have lived with the dog or the cat for this long, and who are we to say that this isn't the right option? But I don't know why we can't be experts who look at the situation and say, no, that's not the actual outcome.
Yeah, we all get outraged when somebody dies and puts in their will that they want the dog killed.
Right.
And it's kind of the same thing, once the animal's not theirs anymore, it's not their choice. But I do think that it goes back to giving people more support. I think people think the shelter is a place for euthanasia, yes. And there are shelters that still request that people sign off that they know the animal's going to die if they can't find it at home. And so I don't think it's that far of a stretch for those people to, I would hope shelters aren't putting people from that category into the ORE category, but there's just a really big blurry line between all of that doesn't make a lot of sense. And I think as it is leaders, if I were a municipal leader, I would not want to have those animals excluded from my data, because people are more aware, and it's going to cause credibility issues in the long run. And so the more transparent we are, the better we have the people, everybody on our side, personally.
If the panel could elaborate on, I've worked with and call on for help and assistance with most of you up there. What I found in my experience is that the things that you're talking about right now ultimately just change what the norm is. When things that were really, really hard when you're fighting through the 70th percentile it's the norm. No, we're going to be in the upper 70s, and then you move on to the things that were really, really hard in the 80th percentile. So a lot of the advice that I get from, most of you when I call on you, they kind of work towards that as you put in things that in place, that in that crisis, in that moment, that become, our distemper situation in Dallas earlier this year. Mm-hmm. It's now just the norm what we do. We still have individual distemper cases that come up, but we now have, the way they move through sounds very similar to what you did with your ringworm, Mike.
Yep. Much easier. My situation is much easier than your situation, but yes. It
really does ultimately change the norm, and I try to send that message, and my staff kind of subconsciously, my rescue groups, it's just kind of the new way when we ask the rescues to change with us. Hey, we don't need you to take these not at risk animals anymore. Yeah. We need you to take these harder to place animals. And the groups ultimately end up embracing that, but I think that it kind of goes right along things that they probably, a couple of years ago would have been a full-blown crisis, but because you've already changed with the norm on how you deal with some of these things. You can elaborate on that at all.
Yeah, so I think that's a really good point. And I mentioned the kitten story earlier, and if we had gone back to just not taking kittens because if we were afraid they were going to die in our care, we would have never figured out how to get to 90% for saping all kittens, even if they come in with umbilical cords. And so you have to get through the ugly puberty phase of everything to get to the adult phase, and we've got to keep remembering that we're still, as a movement, we still have a lot of ugly phases ahead of us, but if we give up or we go backwards, they're still ahead of us. Like if you go backwards, they're still over there. Why don't we just power through them and then get past it and get to the new norm that we all want?
And you're exactly right. That can't be a crisis the next time it happens, right?
Yes.
You go through this now, everything you're doing is to get through it, but it's also to prevent the next distemper dog you get in. That can't be a crisis again, and so that's exactly our ringworm situation. I was told the day before we left that we got a new ringworm cat, but we found him at intake through our new intake protocols, and the team told me like 2 days after he even came in, because they were just like, yep, we've already dipped him, he's in the room, no big deal. And so it's like, okay, sweet. It wasn't a crisis again, but that's why it was worth putting FaceTime in with the unions, putting FaceTime in with the staff, because that's what's going to allow it to not be a crisis the very next time. So totally. Thanks for bringing that up, Ed.
I just want to say one quick thing about this is that I think if you look at your shelter staff as like a chessboard, I think that we have these like amazing knights. Those are the ones that are the horse heads, right? Okay. So I have one of those in the room right now, Michelle. Michelle, raise your hand. Michelle, just like wave at us. That's Michelle. Okay, Michelle's amazing because she took the shelter from like a 40% save rate all the way up to 90, and she's been there 15 years. The shelter's she's almost died there a couple of times for various reasons. But I think that those people help you create the new norm. Mm-hmm. It's hard as a new leader to go in and do that yourself because you don't have that history and that trust with the team. And those nights are like gold because they already have such a trust relationship built up, but they also are incredibly adaptable. I mean, how Michelle survived 15 years in this organization and is now leading no-kill in it, that is the person that needs to lead your team to the new norm. And so those people, I think we need to do a better job of developing and supporting because those are the people that are going to actually get it done.
Absolutely, completely.
Go ahead. I run a dog rescue in Rhode Island, a small dog rescue, and we partner with the same no-kill facilities in several different states in the South. And our partners are dealing with a lot of what we're talking about in this room. We have the luxury of essentially being limited intake. We say no until we have actual space to bring the dog north and either put in foster care or adoptive care. And I guess what I'm struggling with or trying to understand is how can our type of organization best support our partners? Our partners aren't here right now. That would be one thing to get them here and implementing and hearing some of these ideas. But how can, I'm in Rhode Island, I'm not in Mississippi or Arkansas. How can organizations like mine best support organizations that are on the front lines?
I have an answer for that. I think that there's a real opportunity for the northern shelters that don't have as many animals coming in and maybe the luxury of space and time that we don't have down here to maybe do some, what do you call it, when you go to their shelter and they come to yours. And so you could really understand what's happening, and so you can build programming that could support it. Because I think in the South, we really run into a lot of tons of barriers that are put in place that are killing animals. We're trying to get animals, if you're doing transport, trying to get them up north. But if there's no acceptance that some of those might get sick or that they might need to quarantine up there, or maybe they only have 3 days of vaccines before they get there, it makes it really difficult to navigate. And so we're trying to get animals out alive any way that we can, but the fewer holdups in the process, the more we can save down here. So that's what I would say, is just come try to understand it and then try to implement something up there to support.
Hi. You talked about crisis communications a little bit ago. Do you have formal crisis communications plans in place, and is your staff trained and ready to go to respond?
Our team is really good at, we did get a session that we purchased from a crisis communications team, and it was really helpful. And the biggest thing was just to have your story told. Make sure you know what your narrative is, and then get in front of every issue. But I think that it's helpful. And we do have some marketing people here. I think they've already spoken, though. That was yesterday, so they may not be actually here today. But our team can certainly help if people have specific questions about crisis communication. I think they've learned a lot over the years and have some specific tips that could be helpful. And I know last year we had a whole session on crisis communication that it probably maybe was filmed by Maddie's Fund, so it might be on their site, on the Maddie's Fund site. For if you go to, I think it's Maddie's Fund, and then look for American Pets Alive Conference.
And that's just what we're copying, right? I mean, I know I'm personally just copying what I've learned, in Austin, and trying to get us better at that in Orange County.
And there's usually people that will help you pro bono too in the community. If you have connections, just ask for help. A lot of times it's just an hour session to help you frame up some ideas and get some things on paper.
So in my industry, we live and die by that, and we usually have very formalized protocols for this. And I think it's important to look at both the internal communication as well as the external. So who needs to be involved at certain times inside the organization, who needs to know, and who do you need to ask for help when something happens, as well as how do you deal with people outside the social media, the press, and so on.
Are there any other questions?
I was really curious about your interactions with the unions and how you negotiate some of these tricky situations. We consult for shelters, and they go to blows about things like changing the disinfectant. So how you got them past the ringworm thing. Can you tell that story a little bit?
Yeah, I mean, it's very fresh, so I can't promise you I have solved it at all. A lot of it was I think, Kristen coached me a little bit on this before I went to my very first meeting, where I knew I was just going to get slammed, and it was just like, don't fight back initially in those meetings. Don't fight back. And I love a good argument. I love to prove a point and to win a debate, but I just agreed a lot with their very logical points. Agreed we would look into that. So I came out of that first meeting, which was just a big personal attack. I came out of that first meeting at least demonstrating I'm not coming across defensively. I'm not just going against everything that they're saying. It was a valuable experience for me. But I got feedback from my bosses and from HR that I did an incredible job of just not fighting back, and then let's now, in a calmer environment, really start to, one, show them, again, these are best practices. I didn't invent this. I'm fortunate too that our shelter has a strategic plan that has been board approved. And so the Board of Supervisors has already approved this entire strategic plan. In it does not specifically call out ringworm, but it does specifically call out increased save rates for cats. And so I was able to at least, make the point that this is a board approved practice. This is something that, again, is both an industry standard, but also something the shelter's already been tasked to do. And then I don't know if catered is the right word, but I at least implemented some of what they were asking. Not necessarily super stoked to do it, but they wanted signs all over the shelter warning the public of this unsafe situation. And so I didn't make them CDC looking signs. It wasn't warning you're gonna die if you come in here, but we made them kind of cute but eye-catching, and it was a pardon that smell because of the lime sulfur dip, and we at least put the informative ringworm information they wanted, but it wasn't I wasn't willing to have it be a gigantic, nuclear, symbol or what have you. So it was taking some of what they asked and at least letting them have some wins. We put signs everywhere. We made the ringworm ward that we created a ringworm ward. We put up all the signage they wanted there. I had to deal with 3 days of a cease and desist, which meant that their staff who were represented by this union were not allowed to actually go in the ringworm ward at all, which resulted in me and some volunteers really going in there, my assistant director. We just, all right, we'll take care of these cats. Our clinic was incredible during those few days, but that allowed us to at least show that we took their concerns seriously, show that we were listening and open to their concerns, didn't fight back, but still stuck our ground when it came to the fact that we're not euthanizing these cats at all.
Thanks.
And I've heard feedback, because I had the same thing with Playgroup, I've heard feedback that the union has really started to see that they believe I care and that I'm level-headed, and they really appreciate how open I've been to their concerns and whatnot. Yeah.
All right, that's really all the time we have for questions. So join me in thanking our panelists.